Whenever I think back to Outer Wilds, I'm always struck by how much the creators got right. Personally, I'm not even a fan of this genre of game, and after having played it, I can say there was hardly a moment where I wasn't enjoying myself. To me, that's a statement that holds a lot of weight, and that's not just because I don't love the genre. Whenever I play any modern-day AAA game, I'm always struck by the one major similarity between them all. There's always some needless filler content that tends to water down the game. What seems to be so mind-boggling to me is none of this is ever really enjoyable for the player. Yeah, I'm talking about UFF7 Remake. God, this thing needs to get on a treadmill to trim some of that fat. Of course, there is a reason this content exists. Much like how YouTube videos need to reach the 8-minute mark for their ads, video games need to have a respectable amount of playtime to warrant their price tags. Although to me it doesn't really answer the question of why people create basic boring fetch quests to begin with, but maybe it's just because it's easy and writing complex, well thought out stories is challenging. So what does any of this garbage mean in regards to Outer Wilds? I do enjoy going on pointless tangents, but believe me, unlike what I've been talking about so far, there's a good reason for this. One of the biggest strengths of Outer Wilds is not what it does, but rather what it doesn't do. The game is all about exploration and puzzles. While there are 3 technical resources, they are never used as a way of halting the player's progression. The real sought-after jewel is instead something less tangible, but clearly still valuable. What I'm talking about here is knowledge. There are no resources to collect, upgrade trees, or new gear to acquire. While none of the things I just listed are inherently bad, if they are not implemented properly, they can heavily damage a game. There exist some NPCs, but they don't offer you pointless side quests used to extend the playtime of the game. All that matters in this game is getting to see every nook and cranny of what the worlds in Outer Wilds have to offer and experience its compelling story. Outer Wilds is like a stereotypical Chad. It knows why people are here, and it's confident that it can provide what they want. And oh boy, does it. In this video, I'll be talking about various design decisions and how they embody this idea of trimming the fat. I'll also be taking a closer look at how information is conveyed to the player in order to incentivize them to explore the world. I've been trying to show less spoilery footage because you can only really play this title once. If you haven't played the game and made it this far, then I would recommend turning off this video and playing it for yourself. You won't be disappointed. Now that I won't accidentally spoil anyone, let's move on to the rest of the video. At its core, Outer Wilds appears to be a simple game. Besides flying around, reading some text, and using the knowledge gained to solve some puzzles, you don't do anything else. The player only has access to 2 tools, the Signal Scope and the Scout. Both of these are available from the very beginning, and their only functions are assisting the player in solving a puzzle or providing some guidance on where to explore next. It isn't hard to realize that exploration is the king, and everything else bends the knee to it. The gameplay loop is straightforward and obvious to anyone that has played the game. However, underneath this simplicity is a treasure trove of choices that make all of this possible. I've mostly been focusing on what Outer Wilds doesn't do, but there are plenty of mechanics that only further prove that exploration means everything. The first major design decision I want to look at is the 22-minute time loop. It is the core foundation with everything else being designed around it. The loop's biggest strength is it forces everything to be achievable within a certain amount of time. Every single puzzle has to be doable within 22 minutes, and most locations of interest have to be fully explorable within the time frame, meaning you have time to explore multiple locations in case what you learned at one area didn't pique your interest or provide a clue on what to do next. Every single loop has the player learning something new or testing a hypothesis, which acts as a dopamine hit that's not too dissimilar from clearing an objective in a more traditional game. This speed is such a major factor because to keep the player interested in the world, they have to be given a reason to want to continue exploring. One of the biggest problems an exploration game that doesn't have any concrete objectives faces is this issue. Many games today provide the player with situations that make it obvious where to begin and what the resolution is going to be. These tend to be mission-based tasks that are usually guided by some form of marker that tells players exactly where to go or what to do. Some people detest the very existence of these markers, while others rejoice at not having to wander around aimlessly. Regardless of your stance, their purpose is clear. Wandering around endlessly or not being able to figure out what to do next in a game can be frustrating. People play video games for entertainment. Well, most of us do. For some unknown reason, some of us choose to make long drawn-out videos over-analyzing them. I swear it must be some kind of disease or something. Anyway, the time loop is Outer Wilds' biggest defense against this issue. With how information is structured, the player often has some kind of minor goal that they want to achieve during each loop. This can be something concrete, such as traveling to the Southern Observatory to figure out how to get past the strong current on Giant's Deep, but it can also be as simple as just going to a new planet because it looks interesting. Another benefit of the loop is if the player gets stuck on a puzzle or can't find an area, there's always something else to do. The main contributing factor to this is the order information is given to the player. Due to the time limit, every planet and location are available to be explored from the beginning. There aren't any items or upgrades needed to visit a planet or a specific location because the player is starting over every 22 minutes. It would be detrimental to the experience if this wasn't the case. It wouldn't make any sense to keep items or upgrades after going back in time, and having the player constantly go back to retrieve them would get old fast. Of course, the Eye of the Universe is the exception, but since it's the last thing you'll be doing in the game, it isn't a problem. There are some potential downsides associated with a looping mechanic. One that I've already mentioned is affecting the player's overall enjoyment by bogging the game down with needless filler and repetition. An example is only allowing the player to perform one possible action at a specific location when multiple are possible. This forces the player to repeat the same steps over and over again each loop with only some minor differences. This gets boring and tedious pretty quickly. Outer Wilds comes somewhat close to this with the Sunless City and its rising sand, however enough time is given where the player can explore multiple districts before the sand overtakes them. Due to this, it will most likely only take a few trips to complete the city, and it always feels like progress is being made. Instead, every area only needs to be explored once, and all the information a level has to offer is available right from the get-go. Even if you miss something, the log will tell you that something of value was missed and to further explore the area. Another potential drawback of being forced to start the game over after a set period of time is the feeling of frustration it can invoke. The player may not have finished exploring their current location, and now they have to go all the way back just to continue where they left off. Outer Wilds expertly handles this problem by making every location quick to return to. While the player is exploring an entire solar system, traveling to another planet takes only about a minute. This is incorporated with not only traveling to planets, but the size of the planets themselves. Everything is scaled down so that traveling from one location to another on a planet takes no time at all. While some areas can take a bit longer to reach, they are usually associated with some kind of puzzle and big reveal of information. Some examples are the Southern Observatory and the High Energy Lab. A crucial factor that makes returning back to a location so simple is how easily identifiable they are. Most significant locations have some kind of structure on the surface of the planet for the player to identify with. This, in combination with how quickly it is to travel to a planet, makes returning back to an area seamless. You walk straight up to your ship, launch into space, and with a blink of an eye, you've already reached your destination. The player never has to spend time twiddling their thumbs because of how long travel times are, or puzzles they have to redo over and over again just to return to an area. Even with locations where the player would have to do this, such as the Hanging and Sunless City, shortcuts are given so they can immediately return. The game even further pushes the point home by limiting how many resources you have to manage. All the player ever has to worry about while exploring is their oxygen, jetpack fuel, and health. Your ship has an endless supply of fuel, so you can travel as long as you want. Honestly, I'm not quite sure if the term worry or even manage should be used here. Pockets of oxygen are placed so well around each planet that the player never has to worry about running out. There isn't any combat in the game or fightable enemies, so the only way to take damage is if you crash into a planet or make a mistake with your jetpack. Fuel is the only resource you ever truly have to manage, and the game goes out of its way to make this simple. There are plenty of locations where the player can restock fuel when they would most likely need it. One that immediately jumps out at me is Brittle Hollow's North Pole. The fact that planets can be traversed so quickly also makes resource management easy. All 3 resources can be immediately refilled aboard the player's ship. There is no limit to this either, since most locations in the game can be fully explored quickly. If the player begins to run low on resources, they can always return to stock up. Even if they travel a greater distance, planets are so small that you can make the journey back with limited supplies. Oftentimes I didn't even deem it necessary to return to my ship even if I had low resources. I would simply restart my loop because I had completed a substantial amount of content and knew I didn't have time to complete anything else. Since restarting is so quick and fluid, it usually ended up taking less time than returning to my ship anyway. I'm certain even this was intended by the developers. Speaking of the ship, even if you manage to crash into a planet, it's barely an inconvenience. Repairing potentially broken pieces takes no time at all, and doesn't require any resources. You simply hold down repair over the damaged part, and you're good to go. Honestly, you don't even need to repair the ship half the time because on most loops the player doesn't even need to return to it. Some of these decisions may not seem like such a big deal. I mean, putting structures on the surface of a planet so the player can easily return to them isn't anything special. What makes Outer Wilds special in this regard is combining all of these decisions together. The game wants you to get back to exploring as quickly as possible, so it scales everything down. Travel times are barely an inconvenience, and every location can be identified and reached within the first minute of a loop. This makes it so the player never feels like they're racing against the clock despite them being on a time limit. This could have been a flaw in the game's design, but instead most areas can be explored quickly, and the way information is distributed to the player makes them feel like they've accomplished something during each loop. Yet again, Outer Wilds has a strong understanding of why people play games where exploration is the primary focus. They want to unravel the mysteries of the setting and experience all of the crazy environments the game has to offer. The design of Outer Wilds constantly has this thought in mind. Everything is done in the name of player convenience so they can spend all their time actually doing what makes the experience so enjoyable. You don't have to waste time on pointless filler or resource management. This may make the game appear to be rather simple. Like I said earlier, what the player is actually doing most of the time isn't anything complex. What's important to realize is that this simplicity is one of the reasons why Outer Wilds is such a great game. The true complexity of the game is hidden away by all these choices that, when combined together, allow the player to only focus on the best parts of the experience. A point I've been mentioning throughout the video is a game like Outer Wilds needs to provide the player with proper incentives to explore the world it has to offer. This is helped by the design decisions I've been talking about, but without a solid world to actually explore, it all goes out the window. So how does an exploration-focused game with no tangible goal, at least at the beginning, convince the player to keep exploring? A common example is through supplying a reason to visit a certain location. Perhaps there's something of interest on the planet or a person to interact with. Outer Wilds does this right from the get-go. The Nomai text in the museum points to some Nomai structure on the outer rock, which you are then told is your current planet's moon. You are also encouraged to explore Giant's Deep by being told the statue in the museum is originally from there, and that a fellow venturer who initially found it is currently there as well. Another way to tempt the player to explore is through visuals. If you wow the player with stunning sights and unique locations that differ from anything else they've seen before, they'll feel a stronger desire to check it out. Every planet in the Outer Wilds does this exceptionally well. The typhoons in Giant's Deep, the black hole in the middle of Brittle Hollow, and the sand stream between the Hourglass Twins. Visuals can be used in another way to convince the player to check out a location as well. It's not exactly a coincidence that whenever you first wake up, you see the orbital probe cannon exploding in front of Giant's Deep. The developers want the player to wonder what's going on there and have you visit. Even the distance from your starting location is taken into consideration. Dark Bramble, probably the worst place to start exploring, is the farthest planet from you. The other three, which all act as good starting points for the game, are all within the same distance as you. Keeping with what I just said in mind, I think it's a good point to start talking about the order in which information is given to the player. I believe it's clear the developers wanted you to explore the solar system they created in a certain order. Some of you may be thinking what I just said is rather odd. One of Outer Wilds' strongest points is that you can go anywhere at any time. The player is free to start at the Twins, Brittle Hollow, Giant's Deep, or even Dark Bramble if they so choose. While this is true, information given at the beginning of the game focuses the player's attention towards specific planets. There are 3 planets the game draws attention to, these being Giant's Deep, Brittle Hollow, and Dark Bramble. I've already spoken about Giant's Deep visual hint as well as it being the planet where the statue was found. The outer rock is what guides the player towards Brittle Hollow or Dark Bramble. Since the moon is mentioned by the Nomai message in the museum, and it is the closest place the player can visit, this being the first potential stop isn't surprising. The moon also feels like a continuation of the tutorial. It's so small that it acts as a good introduction to exploring an alien environment for the first time. It's easy to land on, meaning you can get your first practice landing in, and it teaches you how to locate your friend's signals in space. Although this isn't exactly rocket science, and there is another tutorial earlier in the game. Outer Rock also introduces the Eye of the Universe and floats the idea that if you want to learn more, you should visit the Southern Observatory on Brittle Hollow. This isn't the only time the game will direct you towards this location either. Dark Bramble is introduced through a giant crater that was created due to a piece of the original planet colliding with the moon. A stronger nod towards the planet, plant, seed thing? Whatever is Feldspar's signal. This is drawn to the player's attention by Esker's notes found on the viewing platform. Not only is it coming from Dark Bramble, but the seed found on Timber Hearth all but confirms that Feldspar is somewhere inside the thing. The seed on Timber Hearth even invokes a sense of wonder and mystery towards Dark Bramble. Feldspar is mentioned as the hero of the Hearthians, and his disappearance is strongly played up, creating even more mystery and desire to visit the planet. What I find to be so surprising is the heavy inclusion of Dark Bramble in the beginning. All of the planets in Outer Wilds are unique, but this plant thing is in a class of its own. There are no landing locations, the entire place is a giant maze that defies space and logic, and it's the only area that actually has hostile enemies. To make matters worse, it has a room that loops every time you travel to the next seed, and an area that is a dead end. In terms of exploration, if you don't know what you're doing, this place is a nightmare. The entire location screams, "Come back and explore me later." This goes against what the game should be doing at this point. If Dark Bramble is the first planet a player visits, they will most likely only experience annoyance and frustration. Instead, Outer Wilds should be hooking the player in immediately. There's another reason why every planet has obvious locations to explore on the surface, to draw the player's attention there and give them something to do. I have no idea why the devs draw so much attention towards Dark Bramble in the beginning, and even continue to do so on Giant's Deep. It is easily the worst planet to go to and explore first. If anything, it's probably one of the last locations many people finish exploring. In contrast to Dark Bramble, Giant's Deep is probably the best location to explore first. It introduces how the player can use the scout to solve a puzzle on the Statue Island, and sections off each zone of the planet into separate islands so the player isn't overwhelmed by options when they're first learning to explore. The only problem with these islands is the landing tutorial isn't exactly effective, and the pinpoint accuracy these islands demand could prove challenging for a first playthrough. The game also goes out of its way to have Gabbro explain that you are most likely stuck in a time loop if you haven't figured it out, and teaches you how to meditate so you can immediately end a loop whenever you want. A little side note, meditating is ridiculously easy to miss. In fact, I didn't even find it during my first playthrough. This is pretty disappointing because the game goes out of its way for the player's convenience for everything else, but being able to end your run prematurely is hidden behind a conversation you may never have. This isn't the end of the world because quitting your save effectively does the same thing but with a longer load time. Regardless, it's still something that should have been more easily accessible. Returning back to Giant's Deep, the gas giant doesn't stand too well on its own. Compared to Brittle Hollow and the Ember Twin, there isn't a significant amount of content to this planet, and there is a surprising amount of repeating text. The construction yard and the orbital probe cannon both have the exact same Nomai scribbles on their walls. Strangely enough, the same Nomai writing exists in each room on the orbital probe cannon as well. Gavro's Island has no real content, and the Statue Island serves as an introduction to using the scout to solve puzzles. The other two islands' purpose is to push you to explore other planets. The Bramble Seed further expands upon Dark Bramble and Feldspar by directly telling the player that's where he went if they hadn't visited the seed on Timber Hearth. It's still a mystery to me why they are so heavily pushing this planet. The construction yard introduces projection pools and provides a very strong incentive to visit the Southern Observatory. While this may sound like criticism, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a bad thing. Okay, the repeating text being on the same planet is a problem, but besides that, everything else is actually good. Giant's Deep is such a strong first planet to visit because it accomplishes everything it needs to. It has some visual punch to it. I mean, the planet is both equally horrifying and breathtaking. The gas giant also springboards the player to Brittle Hollow so they can reach the watery core of the planet and provide some answers to how the statues relate to your memories returning with every loop. There's a strong balance of shifting the player's attention towards new horizons while at the same time supplying answers to some of the questions the game wanted the player to ask themselves. All of this sounds great, however Giant's Deep has the opposite effect if it is the last planet explored. A tightrope the developers have to walk when making a game that can have every area accessible from the beginning is future locations' content being spoiled. Giant's Deep has this problem. Visiting the Southern Observatory first eliminates the mystery of how to get past a strong current protecting the core. The same goes for masks if you explore the Hourglass Twins first. Feldspar being in Dark Bramble isn't interesting if you've already managed to find him. Finally making it to the core of Giant's Deep doesn't feel as rewarding if you already have the necessary knowledge before you ever visit. The game does attempt to rectify this problem with the Quantum Trials and the Orbital Probe Cannon. The Quantum Trials reward of finally allowing you to land on the Quantum Moon is definitely a good one, but the Orbital Probe Cannon is lackluster if you didn't have to spend any time wondering about how to get to the core of Giant's Deep. Hitting a wall when exploring gives the player a goal to strive towards and a sense of accomplishment once they overcome it. It's a powerful motivator to continue playing. The coordinates for the Eye of the Universe are interesting, but they lack the punch the other big reveals in the game have. The Ash Twin Project, talking to Solanum, and finding the vessel all have a much stronger build-up and impact than the coordinates for the Eye of the Universe. This only further hampers Giant's Deep. It doesn't help that the gas giant doesn't have a unique gimmick to it either. Brittle Hollow has the planet's crust slowly falling into a black hole, the twins both have the sand building up or draining, and Dark Bramble is, well, it's Dark Bramble, need I say more? All Giant's Deep has to offer is the typhoons. Thankfully, the big green blob is the only planet that really has this problem. All the other prominent locations have unique information and puzzles to solve that makes exploring them feel worthwhile regardless of when you choose to visit them. Okay, Dark Bramble should probably be explored after the Ember Twin, but the point is the content there is always fresh and interesting no matter which planets you've gone to previously. Logically, the next planet Outer Wilds wants the player to visit is Brittle Hollow, mostly due to giving the player a tangible goal in reaching the Southern Observatory. The developers even went out of their way to hint which building is the Southern Observatory when flying around Brittle Hollow. On the outer rock, a tape recorder from one of your fellow venturers explains that they are traveling to the area. It just so happens their ship can be found parked right outside the entrance of the building, making it easily identifiable. So you park your ship near the entrance and walk straight in. Boom, problem solved. Time to see what's under that current, baby. Psych, the door's jammed and your alien butt's gonna have to struggle for this one. This is actually a blessing in disguise for multiple reasons. I spoke earlier about how creating goals for the player further incentivizes them to continue exploring. This is being further elaborated on here. The Southern Observatory has been built up as a location that not only should interest the player, but it also contains vital information. Walking straight on in isn't nearly as fulfilling as having to work for it. The more arduous journey enhances the sense of accomplishment felt when finally reaching the location and makes the reward feel sweeter. The other purpose behind this is following the path Ryback leads you down brings you to the central area of the planet. This center location has Ryback's camp, which serves as a source of oxygen and fuel, and the location branches off to every other important location on the planet. Pretty well designed if I do say so myself. Of course, the Southern Observatory isn't the only significant location to be explored on Brittle Hollow. The Quantum Shard above the Quantum Tower is also the best starting point for the Quantum Moon storyline. The reason I say this is that the Know My message on the shard tells the player every shard they visit will teach them a new lesson on how quantum objects work. It even creates entries in the log for each shard the player needs to visit and which planets they are located on so they can complete the Quantum Moon story. This does not happen when you find any of the other shards, although you will still get the quantum frequency no matter what shard you find first, so it's not as if you can't locate the others. What this does provide is a stronger guide than the other shards by directly telling the player how many more shards they need to find and which ones are important, yet again creating some kind of goal for them to strive towards. In regards to the rest of the Quantum Tower, I found it to be pretty underwhelming. The answer to entering the tower itself is never hinted towards the player. While it is true Brittle Hollow is slowly falling into the black hole at its center, no other actual landmark ever falls into the hole besides the tower. Not only that, but it also takes over 10 minutes for the tower to fall into the black hole. This is a long period of time to wait. The only way I really see the player discovering this is by getting lucky enough to notice the Quantum Tower is missing through pure chance. Every other puzzle in the game is solvable by some kind of hint found in the solar system. This is the only puzzle I had to look up the answer to because the game doesn't provide any adequate hints on how to solve it. I've seen some people arguing Ryback's comment on checking the surface integrity is the big hint, but the problem I see is you never have to do this to access any other area on Brittle Hollow. There is no precedent set by anything else, and since you hardly have to use the feature, I found it to be pretty forgettable. The other structures on Brittle Hollow guide the player towards two locations, the Hourglass Twins or Dark Bramble. The old Know My City provides the signal frequency to locate the third escape pod hidden in Dark Bramble, explains what the vessel is, and where it crashed. It also informs you that the third escape pod never left Dark Bramble. The Hanging City is the first real mention of the Ash Twin project if the player hasn't visited the Hourglass Twins. Mask Island and Giant's Deep does mention the project first, but I would argue it's more of a small nudge rather than a proper incentive. Also, the White Hole Station informs the player on how to use warp pads and further pushes to explore the twins by introducing the strange time difference. The Nomai are testing this phenomenon at the High Energy Lab on the Twin, and if the player wants to know more, they should pay it a visit. Regarding Brittle Hollow mechanically, the planet is done exceptionally well. Its main gimmick is the black hole and manipulating gravity to have the player travel underneath the crust of the planet. This leads to some fantastic moments, like traveling from the old Nomai ruins to the Hanging City, and maneuvering yourself around to make the journey to the Southern Observatory. The black hole looks intimidating and remains a threat even if you fell in before because you don't want to have to travel back from the White Hole Station. The level design here is memorable, not only within the game itself, but throughout most games in general. Outer Wilds really takes advantage of its environment by creating fantastic planets with ideas games don't even usually attempt. Once you get past Brittle Hollow, besides a small potential trip to Giant's Deep, the next planet the player might visit is the Ember Twin. At this point you're running out of options anyway. Ember Twin is structured in almost the exact same way Brittle Hollow is, or perhaps it's more appropriate to say Brittle Hollow is structured just like the Ember Twin, depending on which the player traverses first. Let me back this up with some proof. Both planets have an escape pod that leads down to where the Nomai settled. The High Energy Lab and Southern Observatory serve as the planet's big reveal/info dump. These locations are both initially blocked off and require a journey to be visited. The Sunless and Hanging City are both cut up into 4 districts, and both planets have a gravity cannon. There's even a small hole that acts as a shortcut back to both cities. Strangely enough, I don't really have an issue with how similar these two planets are structured. The knowledge gained through exploring either planet is completely different, and despite the layouts being similar, how you traverse the planet and solve the puzzles each one has to offer are completely different. The time limit created by the sand slowly building up makes it so what the player will be doing and prioritizing are vastly different from Brittle Hollow. Focusing more on the Ember Twin narrative, the planet is mostly used to elaborate on the Ash Twin project, potentially introduce the Quantum Moon if you haven't already discovered it, inform the player about a new quantum rule, and finally allow safe passage through Dark Bramble. I've mostly been focusing on the order I believe the developers wanted the player to explore the solar system, but I'm going to deviate here. Let's pretend the Ember Twin is the first planet traveled to. The player will still get the escape pod signal, discover the vessel, and learn how to explore Dark Bramble immediately. At this point, the only thing stopping the player from going straight into the Ash Twin project is figuring out how to use the teleporters. Once they visit the White Hole Station, the project core is easily enterable. I have an issue with this. The Ash Twin project is one of the big reveals in the game. The visuals, music, and slow trickle of information given throughout the game all combine into a truly wonderful moment. I wouldn't say the reveal is ruined by visiting the Ember Twin first, but the build-up isn't done nearly as well. The masks on Giant's Deep make the player wonder why the Nomai were storing memories. The White Hole Station introduces the strange time phenomenon, and the Hanging City creates even more mystery with the advanced warp core. Why does the orbital probe cannon only need to fire once? There are many projection pools found on various planets that show the core of the project in a vague way. All of these elements combined together create an interesting narrative for the player to ponder over and something to work towards. Yet again, I don't think going to the Hourglass Twins first ruins the game or anything. The player will most likely need to go to the White Hole Station before they can even enter the Ash Twin project core. My point is the overall narrative the game is trying to tell isn't done as well. It's not bad, just lackluster in comparison to following the path the developers left for you. It's possible they even saw this, although it could be a coincidence. The twins aren't mentioned at all in the beginning of the game, and information regarding them is given out sparingly. Until reaching a certain point on Brittle Hollow, there isn't much of a reason to go there outside of seeing what's up. Besides what I said about visiting Giant's Deep last and the twins, every other major story moment and the build-up towards them is done well no matter what order the planets are visited. The Quantum Moon cannot be accessed until the player finishes the Quantum Trials in Giant's Deep. It is possible to fly over the giant typhoon instead of going under it, but the player won't even know something is inside the typhoon until they discover a quantum shard. This would usually result in the player having to visit Brittle Hollow and the Quantum Tower before going to the Quantum Trials. The point is, information necessary for discovering how to reach Solanum is spread throughout the entire game. So no matter what, the end result feels extremely rewarding. The same can be said about reaching the vessel, one of the other major story moments. This is no small feat. Creating a story with rewarding hoops for the player to jump through is something games struggle with enough. The fact that Outer Wilds achieves it on multiple occasions no matter where the player decides to start the journey is a truly admirable feat and something definitely worth praising. I have a great deal of respect for Outer Wilds as a game. There's so much detail packed into the title that it's almost difficult to notice it all. The developers did an impeccable job designing this game and demonstrated a true understanding of why people play the genre. Everything plays second fiddle to the fantastic world and story they created for us. The only thing Outer Wilds leaves me regretting is the fact that I'll never get to experience everything it has to offer for the first time ever again. But if that's the only major issue I have with the game, perhaps it isn't such a bad thing. Hey there, I wanted to thank you for watching the video. Hopefully I managed to give you some insights into the Outer Wilds design, or at the very least made you appreciate the game more. If you enjoyed the video, I would like to ask you to consider giving it a like or a comment. These videos take a fair amount of time to make, and your interactions really help a small channel grow. I plan on producing content analyzing or critiquing games regularly, so if that interests you, consider subscribing as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.